In August 2024, a team led by researchers from Aberystwyth University published the chemical fingerprint of the altar stone, the 6-ton slab lying flat at the very heart of Stonehenge. For 100 years, everyone assumed it came from Wales, like the other bluestones. The analysis said something else. The minerals inside it matched bedrock in the far northeast of Scotland, at least 700 kilometers away, across mountains, forests, and open water. A stone the weight of 4 cars moved the length of Britain 5,000 years ago. And that is only one of the problems. Under the empty grass around the monument, radar has found 17 buried structures no one knew existed. Less than 2 miles away, archaeologists uncovered the remains of a feast where pigs had been walked in from as far away as Scotland. A mile to the east, a spring was in continuous use for 4,000 years before the first stone was ever raised. And in 2016, a discovery of 90 buried megaliths turned out, on excavation, to be something stranger than the headline. Every one of these threads leads back to the same place, because Stonehenge was never a single monument. It is the one visible fragment of a vast, engineered prehistoric landscape. And the more precisely scientists measure it, the harder the simple version of its story becomes to maintain. Stonehenge stands on Salisbury Plain in southern England, a wide, treeless expanse of chalk grassland where the horizon runs unbroken in every direction and the wind moves through the grass like water. The stones themselves form a broken ring, sarsen uprights the height of double-decker buses, capped with lintels, enclosing a horseshoe of smaller bluestones. The first version of the monument, a circular ditch and bank, was cut into the chalk around 3000 BC. The Great Sarsens went up around 2500 BC. That much is established. Almost everything else has been rewritten in the last 15 years. The rewriting began in earnest in 2010, when the Stonehenge Hidden Landscapes Project, a collaboration between the University of Birmingham, led by Professor Vincent Gaffney, and the Ludwig Boltzmann Institute in Austria, began dragging ground-penetrating radar and magnetometers across the fields surrounding the stones. Field by field, season by season, they built the first high-resolution map of what lies beneath the grass. They expected gaps, empty ground between the known monuments. The instruments found the opposite. By 2014, the survey had revealed 17 previously unknown ritual monuments, shrines, pits, burial mounds, enclosures, scattered across ground that visitors and archaeologists had walked over for a century. The land around Stonehenge was not empty. It was crowded, and the largest anomaly on the map was still waiting. Less than 2 miles northeast of Stonehenge, across a shallow, dry valley, sits Durrington Walls, a grass-covered earthwork so enormous it is difficult to recognize from the ground. Its bank encloses nearly 500 meters, one of the largest henges in Britain. Excavations led by Professor Mike Parker Pearson had already shown that people lived here, a village of small houses dating to around 2500 BC, the exact period the Great Sarsens were being raised. The middens were thick with pig bones, slaughtered in midwinter. This, most researchers now accept, was where the builders of Stonehenge feasted. Then, in 2019, an isotope study led by Dr. Richard Madgwick at Cardiff University analyzed those pig bones and found that the animals had been raised all over Britain, some possibly as far away as Scotland, and driven or carried hundreds of miles to be eaten here. People were not just visiting Stonehenge. Britain was converging on it, and Durrington Walls was not finished producing surprises. In 2015, the radar teams announced anomalies beneath the henge bank, dozens of large buried objects arranged in a line. Headlines declared a buried superhenge of up to 90 monoliths. But when archaeologists excavated in 2016, they found no stones at all. They found enormous pits that had once held timber posts, trunks the size of telephone poles, deliberately extracted, the pits refilled, the whole arrangement then buried under the henge bank. A gigantic timber monument, built and then intentionally erased by the same people for reasons no one has recovered. Why would you build something on that scale in order to dismantle it? The question is still open. A mile or so east of Stonehenge, on the edge of modern Amesbury, beside the River Avon, lies a site that complicates the story from the other direction. It is called Blick Mead, a spring whose water holds a steady temperature all year, feeding a small, sheltered pool. Since 2005, excavations led by David Jacques of the University of Buckingham have pulled tens of thousands of worked flints and animal bones from the soil around it, including the butchered remains of aurochs, wild cattle the size of small cars. The dates run from roughly 8,000 BC to around 4,000 BC. That is the Mesolithic, hunter-gatherers. 4,000 years of repeated visits to one spring, millennia before farming reached Britain, and long before the first ditch was cut at Stonehenge. Even more strikingly, a set of massive pine posts was erected near the future site of Stonehenge itself in the 8th millennium BC. Their post holes were found under what is now the old visitor car park. Something drew people to this specific stretch of chalk thousands of years before the monument existed. What it was, the flints do not say. To find the next thread, you have to leave Salisbury Plain entirely and travel 150 miles west into the Preseli Hills of West Wales. It is a landscape of bare, rocky ridges and outcrops of spotted dolerite, wind-scoured and remote. This is where most of Stonehenge's bluestones came from. Geologists established the match in the 1920s, and modern geochemistry has since pinned several stones to specific outcrops, including Craig Rosie Felon and Carn Godog, where Parker Pearson's team identified what they interpret as Neolithic quarrying, an interpretation some geologists, notably Brian John, continue to dispute, arguing glaciers may have moved the stones instead. The human connection, however, is harder to dismiss. In 2018, Dr. Christoph Snook and colleagues analyzed cremated human remains buried at Stonehenge in its earliest phase, and found that some of those people had lived their final years not on Salisbury Plain, but in Western Britain, consistent with West Wales. The stones and the dead may have traveled together. Parker Pearson has gone further, proposing that a dismantled stone circle at Wan Mon in the Preselis was partially moved and re-erected at Stonehenge, a monument migrating with its people. The evidence, published in 2021, is suggestive. A similar diameter, an empty socket matching the cross-section of one Stonehenge bluestone. But the dating is thin, and the theory remains contested. What is established is this: parts of Stonehenge began their existence somewhere else. What remains uncertain is why anyone believed stones were worth carrying across a country. Even the giant Sarsens, long assumed to be local, only gave up their origin recently. In 2020, a study led by Professor David Nash of the University of Brighton, made possible when a drilled core removed during 1958 repairs was returned from the United States after 60 years, matched the chemistry of the Sarsens to West Woods, about 15 miles north of the monument. 15 miles for stones weighing over 20 tons each, dragged across a river valley by people without wheels. And 15 miles north of Westwoods sits Avebury, a stone circle so large that an entire village stands inside it, with the artificial mound of Silbury Hill nearby, the tallest prehistoric structure in Europe, whose purpose is, even now, simply unknown. By this point, the pattern is clear. Every technique scientists bring to this landscape, radar, isotopes, geochemistry, produces the same shape of answer. The monument gets bigger, the catchment gets wider, the timeline gets deeper. Stonehenge stops looking like a ruin in a field and starts looking like the center of something operating at the scale of the whole island. So, what was it for? The honest answer is that there are several serious theories. and none of them has won. The solstice alignment is real. The monument's axis frames the midsummer sunrise and midwinter sunset. So astronomy and the turning of the year clearly mattered. The cremated dead buried there, at least 150 individuals, support Parker Pearson's argument that this was a monument to ancestors, perhaps paired with Durrington Walls, the domain of the living, linked to Stonehenge by the River Avon and the Ceremonial Avenue. The feasting evidence supports the idea of great seasonal gatherings that pulled communities together from across Britain. Some researchers frame the monument as an act of political unification. Others point to Blickmead and argue the place was sacred long before any of this, and the stones merely monumentalized something older. The evidence supports pieces of all of these. It settles none of them. Which brings us back to the title of this video. Did scientists finally reveal the Stonehenge secret? In one sense, yes, and recently. Within the space of a few years, the sources of nearly every stone were solved. The Sarsens, traced to West Woods in 2020. The Blue Stones, pinned to Preseli outcrops. And in 2024, the Altar Stone, traced to the Orcadian Basin of northeast Scotland. Questions that stood open for a century now have answers written in mineral chemistry. The where is essentially revealed, but every answer widened the why. Because if the altar stone truly came from northeast Scotland, a journey of at least 700 kilometers, which the study's authors argue was likely made partly by sea, then Neolithic Britain was connected in ways the textbooks never allowed. And there is a second thread pointing the same direction. Grooved ware, the pottery style used by the builders at Durrington Walls, appears to have originated in Orkney, off Scotland's northern coast, where the great stone complexes of the Ness of Brodgar and the Ring of Brodgar were flourishing at the same time, 500 miles from Salisbury Plain. Two ends of an island, sharing pottery, architecture, and now, perhaps, a stone. Nobody yet knows what moved between them. People, belief, power, or all three. The instruments that solve the stones cannot answer that. Not yet. Stonehenge was supposed to be the best understood prehistoric monument on Earth. Instead, after a century of digging and a decade of radar, it has become the anchor point of a mystery that now stretches from the cliffs of Wales to the far north of Scotland. A 5,000-year-old network we are only beginning to see the edges of. And the work has not stopped. Geologists are still narrowing the altar stone's source to a specific outcrop, and new surveys of the surrounding landscape are already underway. When the next result lands, you'll want to be here for it. Subscribe, because the ground under Salisbury Plain is not finished talking.